When Jeffrey Smith walked out of prison, he wasn't expecting a celebration, but he also wasn't expecting to come home to nothing. His apartment was stripped, his savings gone, and the daughter he thought he'd be raising was nowhere in sight. The woman he once loved had disappeared into a new life, one that seemed built on everything he lost. Just weeks later, 3 people were dead. Some say it was calculated revenge. Others say it was years of betrayal exploding all at once. But the real question isn't just what Jeffrey did. It's what they did before he came home. Jeffrey Smith walked out of prison after serving 2 years and 8 months on a domestic assault conviction. He was 31. What waited outside wasn't just freedom, it was uncertainty. The last time he'd seen his infant daughter, Tanya, she was barely 4 months old. At the time, he believed he'd be home in time to raise her. But when he returned to his neighborhood on the east side of Louisville, Kentucky, the world had changed. The apartment he once rented was empty, not just of people, but of anything that had once belonged to him. Furniture gone, electronics gone. Even the bedroom safe, where he'd hidden his savings, was missing. Neighbors recalled seeing his ex-girlfriend, Anaya Blades, moving things out over a year earlier. No one had seen her in months. Most didn't know where she'd gone. Jeffrey had entered prison under the impression that Anaya would hold things down. They had fought before his arrest, but they shared a child, and he believed that bond would hold. Instead, his return was marked by absence. The child was not there. The woman was not there. And neither was the life he thought he could resume. He made contact with relatives. That's when he discovered something unexpected. Tanya had been with his mother, Jessica Smith, almost the entire time he was incarcerated. Anaya, he was told, had left her with Jessica before the child turned 1 and never looked back. According to Jessica, she received no financial help, no calls, and no visits from Anaya during those years. The picture became clearer, but uglier. Jeffrey didn't just come home to an empty apartment. He came home to betrayal. The money he had tucked away, more than $100,000 in savings over several years, was gone. His belongings, including custom gold jewelry, had vanished, and the woman he once considered family had seemingly erased him from the life they built together. For someone freshly released, parole conditions alone would have made adjustment difficult. But with no assets, no partner, and no clear legal custody of his daughter, Jeffrey was returning not to a new chapter, but to a void. And the past wasn't done with him yet. As Jeffrey tried to piece together what had happened, he turned to neighbors, old contacts, and eventually, social media. What he found was jarring. Anaya hadn't been struggling. She was living well. Vacation photos, shopping trips, designer handbags, a new car. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. That realization hit harder than expected. The woman who had once begged for his help raising a child had seemingly erased the child altogether. And while Jessica was rationing groceries to raise Tanya, Anaya was documenting nights out in rooftop lounges and private parties. Several posts even hinted at a new relationship, one that had been going on long before Jeffrey's release. There was no record of Anaya checking in on Tanya, no calls to Jessica, no paperwork showing she'd ever tried to reclaim custody. To the outside world, it appeared as if her daughter had never existed. Long before his prison sentence, Jeffrey Smith had made it a point to save. He wasn't wealthy, but he was careful. Over several years, through construction jobs and side hustles, he built up a personal reserve, just over $100,000 in cash. He didn't trust banks, so he kept it hidden in a locked compartment in his bedroom closet. Only 2 people knew about it: his girlfriend, Anaya Blades, and her mother, Michelle. When Jeffrey came home, That money was gone. So was the compartment. So was the closet. In fact, the entire bedroom had been gutted. His gold chains, sneakers, and 2 watches, everything of value, had vanished. At first, there was silence. Anaya didn't respond to messages, but when contact was finally made through a third party, her explanation was short. She had sold everything to care for Tanya. That included the cash, the jewelry, and whatever else she had to let go of while he was away. But that version didn't hold up under scrutiny. Jessica Smith, who had been raising Tanya full-time, said she never received a cent. No diapers, no formula, no financial help, not once in nearly 3 years. According to her, she covered everything herself, relying on fixed income and family support. She kept receipts, photos, and even text logs of the few times she tried to reach Anaya with no response. Friends of Jeffrey confirmed that Anaya and Michelle had access to the apartment just days after his sentencing. One recalled helping them move items out. Another remembered Michelle talking about securing her daughter's future. Neither mentioned Tanya. No matter how Jeffrey viewed it, Anaya Blades had moved on. She was living with someone new, Kelvin Jones, a man with a full-time job, a clean legal record, and family ties in the community. Their relationship wasn't a recent development. Based on what neighbors and mutual acquaintances later revealed, it had begun well before Jeffrey's release, possibly even before his sentencing. Kelvin wasn't just another boyfriend. He was seen publicly with Anaya, introduced at family functions, and described by some as the man who stepped up. Michelle Blades, Anaya's mother, was said to be a vocal supporter of the match. Several people close to the family recalled Michelle referring to Kelvin as a fresh start for her daughter, a man with a better future and fewer complications. But the timing raised questions. Just months after Jeffrey was arrested, Kelvin was already present in Anaya's life. Some believe Michelle encouraged the relationship while Jeffrey was still awaiting trial. Others suggest it was part of a larger pattern. Michelle had influence over many of Anaya's decisions, especially those involving money and relationships. There was no evidence that Kelvin knew about the missing savings, but his presence in the home, living among furniture and personal effects that once belonged to Jeffrey, didn't go unnoticed. And while Anaya had claimed financial hardship as the reason for liquidating Jeffrey's property, her new living conditions painted a different picture. Reports later noted that Michelle and Anaya had used Jeffrey's arrest as a turning point. With him out of the way, there were no obstacles, no legal ties, no shared custody arrangements, and no need to explain how things transitioned so quickly. Everything, apartment, finances, even the child, had been redirected. To some, it looked like a family moving on. To others, it looked like a strategic erasure. Michelle Blades turned 55 that weekend. The celebration was modest. Just close friends and family gathered at her suburban home in southern Jefferson County. It wasn't the kind of event that drew attention. A few decorations, music, takeout food, and drinks. By nightfall, most of the guests had left, but 4 people remained inside the house. Michelle, her daughter Anaya, Anaya's boyfriend Kelvin Jones, and one extended family member, a cousin who lived nearby. It was supposed to be a quiet end to a long day. Instead, it became the site of one of the most shocking homicides the county had seen in years. According to law enforcement, surveillance footage from a nearby residence showed a man matching Jeffrey Smith's description, walking through the area late that night. The footage isn't clear enough to confirm his entry point, but investigators believe he accessed the home through an unlocked side door. What time he arrived is still uncertain. There was no sign of forced entry. No alarm was triggered. What is known is that gunshots were heard just after 11:20 p.m. Multiple calls to 911 were placed from nearby homes reporting loud bangs and a woman screaming. Inside the house, first responders later found 3 bodies. The 4th person, an adult female cousin, was alive, but wounded. She'd been shot in the leg. Her account would become a critical part of the investigation. She told police that the shooter entered quietly, targeted specific individuals, and gave her a chilling instruction: call 911. Then he fled. The planning behind the act remains a point of debate. Authorities believe Jeffrey had gathered information in the days leading up to the incident. Witnesses from earlier in the week recalled seeing him near Michelle's street. Whether the party itself was the intended target, or simply the opportunity that presented itself, is still unclear. What investigators do agree on is this: the attack was not random. The victims were known. The shooter had a purpose. And the gathering that was meant to celebrate life would end in bloodshed. By the time first responders arrived at the Blades residence, it was already too late. Anaya Blades, Michelle Blades, and Kelvin Jones were pronounced dead at the scene. Each had been shot at close range, with forensic examiners later confirming that the weapon used was a semi-automatic handgun. The nature of the wounds suggested deliberate targeting. No signs of a struggle, no crossfire, no random spraying of bullets. This was controlled. One person, however, had survived. A 26-year-old female relative, later identified as a cousin, was found on the living room floor with a single gunshot wound to her lower leg. According to her statement, the shooter pointed the weapon at her, then paused. Instead of finishing the act, he told her to call 911. That instruction may have been the only reason she lived. Authorities say her call came in just minutes after the gunfire. Despite her injury, she was able to speak clearly to dispatchers and describe the scene. She mentioned Jeffrey Smith by name, stating that he had entered the house suddenly and shot the others without hesitation. Her account, combined with the ballistic evidence and physical clues left at the scene, gave law enforcement a starting point. Shell casings were recovered near each victim. No items appeared to have been taken. The motive wasn't robbery, it was personal. The cousin's statement would become central to the case. Investigators described her as alert, consistent, and cooperative. She had no known disputes with Jeffrey, and her presence at the party appeared to be incidental. Her injury, though serious, was not life-threatening. She was treated at the hospital and later placed under protection while the investigation continued. In the chaos, Jeffrey Smith had managed to flee. No vehicle was seen leaving the area, and no witnesses observed him running. But what he left behind, a spent magazine clip, a partial fingerprint on a doorknob, and one living witness, was enough to launch an immediate multi-agency manhunt. What began as a family gathering had turned into a triple homicide. And with one surviving voice, the case now had a name. A statewide alert was issued, followed by a federal warrant. Surveillance footage, forensic matches, and the surviving witness's statement placed him at the scene. 10 days later, Jeffrey was located at a budget motel just outside Memphis, Tennessee, over 300 miles from the crime scene. He had checked in under his real name using a state-issued ID. Investigators say he offered no resistance. The arrest was made without incident. He was alone, unarmed, and had few personal belongings. The vehicle parked outside matched the description of the car seen in Louisville days before. Authorities believe he had been moving between low-cost motels during that period. Receipts found in the room confirmed multiple short stays along the interstate corridor. There was no sign he had help evading capture. No fake IDs, no burner phones, no disguises. It wasn't an escape. It was avoidance, temporary and ultimately unsuccessful. Back in Louisville, his mother, Jessica Smith, defended him publicly. In statements made to local news, She described her son as broken, not dangerous. She insisted that he had been pushed to the edge by betrayal, poverty, and the loss of his child. According to her, Jeffrey was a man who snapped, not someone who plotted. Prosecutors pushed back. They painted a picture of deliberate violence, a man who had time, motive, and means, a man who waited for the right moment, when his targets were isolated, and acted with lethal precision. The recovered weapon, the timing of the attack, and his decision to flee rather than turn himself in all pointed, they argued, to premeditation. Ballistics matched the bullets at the scene to a rented firearm found discarded in a nearby dumpster. Forensics placed his fingerprint on a doorknob inside the Blades residence. The cousin's statement, consistent from day one, aligned with the timeline. The arrest wasn't just the end of the manhunt. It was the beginning of a legal showdown, one where the facts were clear, but the interpretations were not. And the final judgment was still to come. The trial of Jeffrey Smith drew mixed reactions from the public. On one side, prosecutors laid out a clear case: premeditated murder committed in cold blood. They presented forensic evidence, traced the weapon rental, and leaned heavily on the testimony of the surviving witness. For them, this wasn't a man acting under pressure. It was retaliation, planned, targeted, and final. But beyond the courtroom, the narrative was more divided. Some saw Jeffrey as a man failed by the very people closest to him. They pointed to the loss of his savings, the disappearance of his daughter, and the sudden erasure of his former life. To them, it wasn't just about murder. It was about betrayal pushed too far. Still, the law didn't bend for personal pain. After a 3-week trial, the jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no appeal filed. Jeffrey accepted the sentence in silence. Tanya Smith was placed in state care following her father's arrest. With no legal claim from Anaya's side and no known will or custody plan, the court eventually granted adoption to relatives on Jeffrey's paternal side. Jessica Smith remained in contact, visiting regularly and helping maintain continuity for the child. Years later, people still debate whether Jeffrey Smith acted out of trauma or calculation. 3 people lost their lives. A child lost both parents, and a community was left with silence where answers used to be.